afternoon, everyone. How are you doing today? My name is Dan Fox. Can you all hear me okay? Great. My name is Dan Fox, and I lead the Creative Technology Group at Crispin, Porter, and Bogusky. I'm also a member of the 4A's Creative Technology Committee and one of the organizers of the conference. It's a real honor and privilege to be speaking to you today, and I can tell you what I've just said. I promise you what I've just said is the least interesting thing that you'll hear in the next 45 minutes. Because today I have the honor and privilege to introduce you to one of my personal heroes, Ray Kurzweil. And I don't actually know, I assume Ray is pretty famous, especially among technology communities like this, but I guess I'd like to get a little show of hands. How many people have heard of Ray Kurzweil? Mostly everyone. How many people have read one of his books? Great, we have a good showing of other Ray Kurzweil fans. So I'll give you a little bit of a description of Ray. Mr. Kurzweil is a serial entrepreneur and the author of 7 books, but perhaps he's most famous as one of the world's foremost futurists. By way of introduction to his brand of thinking, I'd like to speak to you briefly about one of his fundamental theories, which is the law of accelerating returns. The reason why this theory made such a personal impression on me, and I actually literally described this theory to my in-laws at Thanksgiving dinner, and I think at first they were like, who is this guy? And then by the end they were like, okay, I get it, this is cool. But the reason why this theory made such a personal impression on me is that when I examined it, it seemed so intuitive and so obvious, and yet I had never really taken the time to fully think through its implications. The basic theory is this: the impact of innovation on future advancements is multiplicative, not additive. Therefore, advances in technology occur on an exponential rather than a linear scale. Oh, and there's Mr. Kurzweil right now. Mr. Kurzweil, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
I hope that I'm representing your theory accurately. Feel free to interrupt me at any time.
No, perfectly. You can stand in for me in the future.
Okay. So, if advances in technology were linear, then we would expect to see the time between major breakthroughs in technology to be roughly equivalent. But when we examine the course of human history, we see a far different story. As an example, let's look at some of our major advances in communication technology. First, we develop spoken language. Then, tens of thousands of years later, we develop written language. Then, thousands of years later, we develop the printing press. Then, hundreds of years later, we develop the telegraph. Then, dozens of years later, we develop the radio. Then the television, then internet, then mobile technologies, then social networks. Paradigm shifts in technological change are occurring at an ever-increasing rate of speed. In his book, The Singularity is Near, Mr. Kurzweil plots the curve of human technological history on a graph and comes to a startling conclusion. The early stages of exponential development may be deceptively slow, but we have entered the knee of the curve, the point where technological change begins to hit the hockey stick. Mr. Kurzweil argues that before the middle of this century, the growth rates of our technology will become essentially vertical, a period Mr. Kurzweil describes as the singularity. And this is a quote from his book. From a purely mathematical perspective, the growth rates will still be finite, but so extreme that the changes they bring about will appear to rupture the fabric of human history. If Mr. Kurzweil is correct, and he's convinced me, the next 3 decades will be a truly extraordinary time to be alive, and an incredible time to be a technologist. Today, Mr. Kurzweil works for Google as a director of engineering. Interviewing Mr. Kurzweil today is Matt Jones. Matt's the interaction design director at Google Creative Labs. Matt's previous experiences include stints at Berg, Nokia, BBC, and as a co-founder and design director of Doppler.com. You can read about Matt's views on interaction design, comic books, and self-replicating robot dogs at his website, magicalnihilism.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Matt Jones and Ray Kurzweil.
There's some bongos behind the stage. I thought I'd sort of bring them out and turn this into a kind of beat poetry type affair. But no. Hi, Ray. Matt here. We're going to speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to throw it open to questions for 15 minutes. We couldn't get clearance from Larry and Sergey for Ray to manifest as a swarm of nanites on the stage, so that's why we're using the Hangout, which is a shame, but maybe next year. Dan's done an excellent job of introducing some of the tenets of your books, and I'm a big fan of them. One of the things that struck me as somebody who works with people who create with technology every day, and this audience is full of developers and coders and people who probably, when they're not being paid a salary, also tinker and create with technology. And in your books, you talk a lot about software itself becoming a creator, exhibiting at art galleries and giving performances in of their own creative works. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where we're heading when software, hardware, computer technology, digital technology moves beyond becoming a kind of tool or a platform. It becomes a kind of creative partner with the human, and how that might feel, and how, as people who work day to day trying to create and invent things with technology, how that might feel for us.
Good question. First of all, it's a pleasure to join you all, at least virtually. You are all the cutting edge of human communication. It's remarkable how effective small bursts of communication can be when they're well designed. And that, by the way, was our first invention, spoken language, Dan alluded to. That took hundreds of thousands of years, but that allowed us to share our experiences and our insights, and something that really no other animal species managed to do, particularly with the hierarchical complexity of human language. Computers right now are enabling human creativity. I often think of my father, who was a brilliant musician. Died in 1970. Heart disease, that's a whole other issue. But if you wanted to actually hear his orchestral compositions, he had to hire an orchestra, have late night discussions with funders, call up all the musicians. I would stay up late with him and run off scores on a mimeograph machine. You have to teach all the parts of the musicians, and then he could actually hear his composition. If you wanted to change it, maybe make a few changes on the fly, but otherwise you'd have to dismiss the musicians and start over. Today, a kid in her dorm room can hear her orchestral composition, jazz band, rock group, whatever, on her synthesizer software, make changes like you would change a letter on a word processor. So it's greatly enabled human creativity in every area, whether you're doing video or graphic arts, music. And computers have been automating jobs at the bottom of the skill ladder and creating new jobs at the top of the skill ladder. So we need more education. In fact, we spend now 10 times as much as we did a century ago in constant dollars on K through 12 per student. There were 50,000 college students in 1870. We have 12 million today. So sometimes, people ask, well, we're investing in education to enhance our own skills so that we can cope with this rising skill ladder. What happens when the skill of computers soars past human levels? My view is we're going to continue with the same strategy, which is enhancing our own capabilities. We've been doing that through education, and we also use computers in education, but we're going to literally make ourselves smarter with our computers. I mean, the reason we created tools is I couldn't reach the fruit at that higher branch, so I created a tool that extended my physical reach. And now we have these tools that extend our mental reach. I can access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. This is an expansion of my neocortex into the cloud. And so we're already making ourselves smarter. I can have work groups now of 2 or 3 people in a matter of days or weeks. It would used to require several hundred people years to do. We're definitely more productive because of these brain extenders. During that one-day SOPA strike, I felt like a part of my brain had gone on strike. These have become part of our brain, even if they're external to it. But these are going to continue to grow exponentially. This, by the way, to reinforce what Dan said about the exponential growth of the price performance of information technology, is several billion times more powerful per constant dollar than the computer I used when I was a student. It's 100,000 times smaller. We'll do both of those things again in 25 years. This will be another billion times more powerful per dollar. It'll be 100,000 times smaller. It'll be the size of a blood cell. And it's going to continue to make us smarter. We're going to get more intimate with it. You know, when I was a student, I had to take my bicycle to the computer. Now we carry it on our belts. There are computers already in our bodies and brains that will become ubiquitous when they are the size of blood cells. We'll have computerized nanobots that'll keep us healthy, augmenting our immune system. They'll put our neocortex directly on the cloud. So we're going to enhance ourselves. We've been doing that through education. We do that now with these mostly external tools. We'll continue to make ourselves smarter. And I would not make a distinction. I mean, this is part of the human civilization. We are a human technological civilization. It's not us versus computers. This is not an alien invasion of these things from Mars. We created these tools to extend our own reach. And we'll continue to do that, and that's how we'll keep up with it to remain competitive. And in fact, even though people, this has been very controversial ever since the automation of the textile industry in 1800 in England, which started the Industrial Revolution, but we actually create more jobs than we eliminate. We have twice as many people working now as a percentage of the working eligible population than we did a century ago. And the new jobs pay 10 times as much in constant dollars, and the new jobs are at the top of the skill ladder and are much more interesting than the old jobs. We're going to continue that trend.
So in terms of what you've been talking about extending our capabilities and almost becoming one with these extensions, these kind of technological capabilities that we're able to invent for ourselves, do you think that the software intelligences that we will work with will be apart from us, or will they be a part of us as you've described? Will we have a dialogue with them? Or?
Well, I mean, they're very intimate with us now. I mean, we are pretty much online all the time. We're constantly communicating with each other, accessing knowledge that's either personal knowledge or worldwide knowledge continually. Very few people opt out of these brain extenders. A kid in Africa today with a smartphone has access to more information than the President of the United States did 15 years ago. And I think it's somewhat of an arbitrary distinction whether the computer is inside your body or outside. I mean, there are people with computers inside their bodies and brains today. Since that involves at least minimally invasive surgery, we do that for important medical problems, disabilities, cochlear implants, neural implants for Parkinson's disease, which, by the way, now can actually interact with multiple places in your brain, are much more sophisticated than the first generation. You can download new software to the neural implant connected into your brain from outside the patient. There's actually concerns about people hacking into that software, which is wirelessly downloaded. So that's today. But I think, it doesn't really matter whether the computer happens to be inside your body or outside your body. Putting it inside your body is a pretty convenient place to keep it. You won't leave it at home that way. And as they get, really small, the size of blood cells will routinely do that for augmenting our immune system and improving our memories and so on. I don't see it as a fundamental distinction. We are already expanding our brains in the cloud. And Dan, mentioned my law of accelerating returns. It's worth noting how fundamental that is. Our intuition about the future is not exponential, it's linear. The kinds of problems that we encountered when our brains were evolving were linear ones. I tracked that animal in the field 10,000 years ago, and I didn't expect it to speed up. Making a linear prediction of its movement was a good assumption. So that linear expectation about the future, these linear predictors are hardwired in our brains. And even very sophisticated people, I've had these debates with Nobel Prize winners who have a linear intuition about the future. So halfway through the 15-year Genome Project, 1% had been done. And mainstream critics, including Nobel Prize winners, were saying, I told you this was going to be a failure. Here you are, 7.5 years, 1%. It's going to take 750 years, just like we said. That was linear thinking. My reaction was, we're at 1%, we're almost done, because it's an exponential progression. And 1% is only 7 doublings for 100%. It's been doubling every year. And indeed, it was finished 7 years later, and every other aspect now of biology, as in information technology, has continued this exponential climb. So we're going to continue to shrink technology. That's going to enable us to get closer with it. But these are tools that we create to extend our own reach. That's the unique aspect of our species.
I think just coming to something you mentioned there, how we change our intuitions or how we train our intuition. Do you think that intuition is a very prized human quality, and it's a very prized quality in sort of the creative industries, the creative professions? Do you think that this kind of expansion or almost like exporting our access to knowledge to, as you said, to use your phrase, putting our neocortexes in the clouds or depending on these kind of external networks or resources will change the way that we form our intuitions or form our experiences, and hence change the way that we perhaps make creative decisions or create work?
Yeah, well, let me comment on creativity, because I talk about that in my most recent book, How to Create a Mind. And that book, by the way, accounts for my being here at Google, because I gave an early version of it to Larry Page, and he liked it. And we agreed I would develop those ideas on how to create artificial intelligence here at Google. But the neocortex is really a great metaphor machine. It recognizes patterns, and it can see a pattern even if the elements of the pattern have certain different qualities. And that's really what a metaphor is. You express an idea based on something else. So let's take a very creative leap in history, which was Darwin's insight into the origin of species, which was quite radical. He said that we're all cousins with every other living thing. We are cousins of the bird you see flying around, the spider, the elm tree, millionth or billionth cousins perhaps. We're all part of a great tree of life. Now, how did he get that insight? It was actually a metaphor. He was watching a geologist, Lyell, who had a radical thesis. Geologists were wondering, where did these great caverns come from, like the Grand Canyon? And they noticed that there were little trickles of water at the bottom of each one. And so he said, well, the little trickle of water carved out this great canyon. That seemed ridiculous. How could a little trickle of water carve out these huge mountains of stone? But he did the math, and a few molecules, at a time, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, that actually worked. It was completely rejected because it was seen as ridiculous by geologists. But over a 15-year period, they began finally to do the math and saw that he was right. And Darwin discusses this at the beginning of his breakthrough book, Origin of Species, that he drew an analogy from that to how little trickles of changes from one generation to another would actually carve out over thousands of generations a new species. And he made a direct metaphor between this geological insight and this biological insight. It's quite a leap, but it actually makes sense if you think about it. And I describe how Einstein actually did the same thing with his thought experiments, which are actually as simple as what I just described with Lyell's thought experiment. So that's fundamentally how creativity works. We see something, we might just happen to see a dog playing with a ball, and it gives us an idea about some new software algorithm. But our neocortex is able to make these leaps. And I describe how the neocortex works and what I'm working on at Google and what the artificial intelligence world is working on in general is these biologically inspired models of the brain. And I think we can actually create these kinds of systems to basically expand our own creativity. And we'll work with these non-biological systems to expand our own intelligence, including the cutting edge of it, which is intuition and creativity.
So in terms of kind of expanding our own creativity and expanding kind of the ways in which machines might create, if you like, I guess a lot of people here working in the advertising industry work a lot with language, work a lot with, if you like, wordplay and humorous language and wit. How far off are we from software being witty?
Well, that's actually, I describe the neocortex in my book as a hierarchy.